Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's PHDV Policy Committee webinar. Today, Christina Pickles will be speaking about the Wetland Education Network Collaborating to Increase Wetland Knowledge in Alberta. Whenever you're ready, Christina, you're welcome to start.
All right, thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Pickles. Ian ensured he said it right. He was worried he would say it wrong. It is Pickles. So thanks, Ian. Thank you for inviting me here today to talk about the Wetland Education Network. I am the coordinator of the network, and this is a project of Alberta NAWAMP. And I'm making the assumption that everyone on the call is very familiar with Alberta NAWAMP, so I won't go into who they are and what they do, because I believe you already know. So the outline of what I'm going to talk about today, a bit about the history of the project, why Alberta NAWAMP took this project on and decided to dedicate some resources to it, the structure of the network, so how is it set up, and then why a network approach, some of the the stages of the network that I like to keep in mind in this type of work, what the Wetland Education Network has done so far, so who's on the action groups and what are their focuses and what are their interests and what are they working on. So I'll go into a little in depth there, and then next steps. This is the first year of the Wetland Education Network really up and running. So it's pretty new and fresh, and there's definitely some good next steps when it comes to what should happen next. There is a chat box, Ian informs me, on the left-hand side of the screen if you want to add any questions. We can maybe do some questions along the way, or if you have questions at the end, there'll be plenty of time to ask those. It is a bit challenging talking into the void, so thank you for your attention on that. So I just also want to start by saying that your partnership, the Prairie Habitat Joint Venture, you understand the value of bringing people together. So diverse organizations, agencies, people, municipalities to solve a problem. And so whether sometimes you're more of a formal partnership, the network might be considered a bit more informal than a partnership. But at the base, we're kind of doing the same thing. We're bringing together a diverse people to help solve a problem or to work together to advance something. So some of the concepts I'm going to talk about are probably very familiar to the work that you do. So the structure, well, actually, first the history of the project, just super briefly. Several years ago, Alberta NAWAMP saw a need to coordinate some wetland education in the province, that there were many organizations, not many, but there were organizations doing wetland education, but they weren't necessarily coordinated. And so they saw an opportunity to do that. And so they put together a committee to explore that opportunity, and they came up with the Wetland Education Network. They came up with the structure, and then they actually did a pilot to see how it would work and what the feedback was from the participants, and decided to go forward with it. So we started last March with the most recent workshop, and so basically it's been going for almost a year as sort of an official project of Alberta NAWAMP. And Alberta NAWAMP has decided that they would like to provide seed money for the network for the first 3 years, and then their goal is to have the Wetland Education Network out on its own, and that's still sort of a work in progress what that will actually look like. So that's the approach that they've taken to kind of seed it, to get it started, and then hopefully we can go off on our own and fly. So that's a little bit about the project. Next, the structure. So this is what the committee that initially sat down to talk about this created. I've kind of updated it a little bit from the initial vision. So the Alberta NAWAMP Communications Committee oversees the Wetland Education Network, so that it's a project of theirs. The next line is the coordinator. So Tara, I'm sure you're all familiar with Tara, is the coordinator of Alberta NAWAMP. So she oversees me, who's the coordinator of the Wetland Education Network. And I'll talk a little bit more about my role in the network. Then we have the Wetland Education Network community. So basically anyone can sign up for our newsletter. Anyone can come to our annual workshop. And we have, the newsletter goes out occasionally. And I think some of the next steps for the network will be to how to engage that wider community that might not be involved with our action groups. But basically anyone's welcome to join the Wetland Education Network community to stay in touch with what we're doing. We're also developing an online hub, which again, anyone can have access to access the resources that we'll have up there. And this bottom piece of the pyramid, these are the action groups, we're calling them. And these are the worker bees of the network. So my first job when I came on as coordinator was to recruit members of the action groups. So Alberta NAWAP identified these 4 sectors, and then we recruited people to participate in these action groups. And we wanted to find people who could speak to the wetland needs of their community, of their sector, who could identify what the needs were and develop some tools and resources to meet those needs. So these are our 4 action groups: the Agricultural Action Group, Municipal Action Group, Education and Public Action Group, and the Industry Action Group. And I'll talk more about sort of the character of all of them, and I'm sure you all understand that each of these sectors have a unique character. Their needs are some similarities and differences, and I've learned a lot about these different sectors through the Wetland Education Network. So I'll talk more about that when we get to sort of who's involved in the action groups and what they've been doing. So a little bit about my role as a coordinator, and I don't want to say I'm essential, but I think people who act in these roles as coordinators are really important for these types of networks. The people that are participating in the network, this is something they do to help advance their work, but it's not the main thing they do. They are extremely busy people who have full plates. So the coordinator can help do some of that behind the scenes stuff that helps move the network forward. And so I set meetings, agendas, logistics. I can facilitate communication between the action groups. So I participate in all the action groups. So if there's commonalities, I can identify those and help people connect. Support the action groups in their ideas. We've all been part of groups where we come up with these great ideas, but everyone's too busy to follow through on them. And the role of the coordinator might not be to actually follow through on them, but to kind of keep people accountable, to follow through on their ideas and to be that worker bee in the background that can help make some of that happen. I think in the future, the coordinator will also help engage that larger network through the newsletter, but maybe there's also other ways to perhaps work regionally within wetland education as well, and then also to coordinate with Alberta NAWAP. That's an important role of the coordinator as well, to ensure that we're on the right track and that they're aware of everything that the group is doing. So that's the structure that we're working with. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of why a network approach, and I find it very interesting, all these different words we use: committees, networks, action groups. Sometimes they're similar, they're the same word for basically the same thing. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. I really like that quote. And a network works to bring together people from diverse organizations and agencies to help solve a problem. So wetland loss is a complex problem with a variety of solutions, and education and outreach is only one part of that. And no one single organization can take it on. As you also probably know, it's challenging to work with a very diverse group of people with different missions and visions and doing different type of work. But in the long run, we can have a larger impact by working together and coordinating that work. So some of the characteristics that people who study networks promote and see is that they are novel and flexible combinations of people. Like I said, the combinations of people that we get in a network or a partnership are just not possible in one organization. So that's an important aspect of a network. We assemble small increments of people's time for sort of sporadic use to work on something rather than kind of locking members down for a long period of time. So maybe a network might be more nimble than a partnership potentially. Networks have an ability to move information pretty quickly. So all these different organizations, again, have their own networks. And you probably see this in your partnership as well, that information can then be spread really widely and have a larger impact when we bring a diverse number of people to the table. The idea of pooling our resources, ideas, and skills is a powerful part of a network. And then to have a common language and approach, and again, you understand that as a partnership, if you're speaking the same language, singing from the same song sheet, you can have a larger impact, as opposed to all saying things slightly differently. It's confusing to our audiences. If we have a common language and approach, it can make a big difference. So that's some of the characteristics of the network. It looks really simple. You get people together, you connect, you align, and then you produce. And I think it's really important to think about these different stages of a network. And I have some learnings with the Wetland Education Network around these sort of 3 stages that a network goes through, and I'll get to that later. But that idea that people need to connect, we need to align, have some goals together, and then we're able to produce and go forward with things. And I'm probably pretty sure that you've seen the same thing in your partnership. So that idea of connecting, this piece is frustrating for some people who like action. Connection is about building relationships and trust within the group. It's exchanging information, knowing who knows what. Again, it helps to build that trust. Who in the group can answer my questions? It's pretty basic. If you want to use the word networking, how we've used it traditionally, that's that connect piece, where we learn who each other is and who knows what and exchange information. And some networks kind of stay at that level, but the Wetland Education would like to move through that to the production phase. So an example, not with this project, but another project I was working on around communities of practice. I was really excited about bringing people together to learn together and perhaps align and produce in the future. And I was talking to an educator, been in the field for years and years and years, and he said, "Christina, I am tired of handshakes and potlucks. Let's do something together." And so for him, that connect phase was super frustrating. He hadn't been part of a group that had moved beyond that. He was tired of sitting around and just getting to know people. He wanted to move to action. And so when I was talking to him, like, oh yeah, we're going to move to do stuff, Cal. We're going to change the world together. And now that I've done a community of practice and a network, you can't forget about that connection phase. You can't really rush it because it affects how you can align your goals and the trust within the network and what you can produce in the end. So if I would run into Cal again, I would tell him that handshakes and potlucks are kind of important before we can get to the action piece. The next important part is to have that shared set of ideas, goals, and strategies, so aligning our work. Because if you look at the people around the table, they have very diverse visions and missions and how they think things should be done. So that also takes some time, but I think it's a really important step, is that aligning phase where we have some, not just common language around wetlands, but a common understanding of what makes excellent wetland education. What does that look like? Again, putting us all on the same page. But once you're aligned and you have those common goals, and again, I think your organization understands that, your partnership understands that, it can be a really powerful thing to speak with one voice. And then finally, once you have that connection and that trust, you have some clear goals and you're aligned in your messaging, then you can perhaps lead to producing something together. And when we say produce, it could be something like I have here. I'll talk about that in a couple of moments. A guide, like an actual physical resource. It could also be something like innovative practices or public policy proposals, whatever that is. That's sort of the goal of many networks, is to get to that product phase, where you can produce something that normally you wouldn't have been able to do alone, but you can do together as a group. Related to the Wetland Education Network and the idea of producing something, Alberta NAWAM for this year only provided each action group with $5,000 to produce something, to spend on a tool or a resource, or to support their work in some way to advance wetland education in Alberta. And so that was part of this year's work. And it's been a bit of, I have some mixed feelings about that $5,000 because I felt we had to rush a little bit to decide what to produce this year under a tight timeline. So I don't think we really spent the time we needed on that aligning our goals in this first year, which is a balance because we will, each group is creating something, so we'll be able to show that we've moved forward, we've produced something, this is really exciting, but we didn't have the time this year to really align our goals and come up with that common way of speaking about wetlands right away. So having that $5,000 has allowed us to move forward and produce something to show action, but we, again, didn't get that time to really dive into aligning our goals. And I think that's going to be an important step for next year, is to create those short, medium, and long-term goals for each of the action groups. All right, does anyone, again, are there any questions in the chat box up to now? I'll just take a little breather if anyone has any questions about what I've said so far.
None yet. Usually, generally the questions are at the end of the presentation.
All right. Mostly I just wanted a drink of water. All right. So the next piece I'm going to talk about is each of the action groups. So as I said, the first task was to populate these action groups. And these are, so for each of the action groups, I'll talk a little bit about them. On the screen is the list of the organizations currently in the action group. And actually a note about action groups I've been just thinking about, these were organized by sector. That is one way to organize these action groups. And I'd be curious to see over time if this evolves a little bit, because there's also opportunity to organize around topic areas, because we are, by creating these sector groups, we are creating these silos again. The role of the coordinator is to kind of bridge these action groups, but maybe in the future there's an opportunity for a group to get together to talk about education around the wetland policy, because that's of interest to several of the action groups. So organizing around sector is one way to do it. Another way to consider would be to organize around some topic areas. And that's maybe something to consider in the future. So these are the members currently of the action group, and it's going to ebb and flow. Some people come to meetings, some people miss meetings, but these are people who have said they're committed to this action group. And we totally recognize that not everyone we need here is in this action group. Some organizations weren't able to commit people to attend, but there's other ways, again, that's the role of the coordinator, other ways to engage people in the work of the action groups without them actually sitting on the action group. So the beef producers were unable to commit someone to come to the action group, but are interested in staying informed and involved at a different level. So yeah, so that's the agricultural action group. A little bit about what their conversations are around, and I don't think it'll be any surprise to the group here. This group is really focused on the wetland policy. They see producers struggling with how to implement it, what are their roles and responsibilities with it. So there's, the first meeting was basically all about that, people sharing their stories and experiences and some of their sort of frustrations with sort of that education around the wetland policy. And in the focus group, they really focused on basic wetland education, which is also important for this action group. But when we bring them together, the real focus was on how do we reach producers with the policy. And so when they voiced those concerns at the second meeting, I brought in someone from Alberta Environment and Parks to talk about what they might be doing to share information about the policy with the agricultural sector. An environmental protection officer came in as well to give a presentation about what he does around wetland, the policy education piece, wetland enforcement. So again, that's part of my role as well, is to identify the needs of the group and to bring in people to try to address those needs. So this group, although the policy was sort of top of mind, they decided that there was some work that needed to be done on Alberta Environment and Parks side to educate about the policy to producers. I have a feeling that the Agricultural Action Group will wade into how to do that eventually, but they weren't ready to do that right now. So they're pursuing a project. So they're spending their $5,000 on doing some profiles. So they wanted to profile producers with wetlands on their property. So we have a writer that's going to do 5 profiles representing different types of producers, different areas of the province, interviewing the producer about wetlands, but also bringing in the organizations, whether it was Ducks or Alice or their county, whoever it was that helped support them with wetlands on their property, to talk about that as well. What does that process look like? So those are still in development, and so they decided to kind of go back to basics to profile the positives of wetlands on producers' property. So that's what that group is working on. A couple of other things that have come up during these conversations. Perhaps there's an opportunity to add more wetland-specific content to the environmental farm plan. We had a good presentation from Paul Watson to talk about that, and so that's an opportunity that this agricultural group could pursue as well. So when we get people together, we never know what are the pieces that are going to show up that they can add value to. So that's the Agricultural Action Group. The next group is the Municipal Action Group, and this group are probably the most engaged. And it's for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it depends on the people. We have 2 people in particular in this action group who are just rock stars. They've been involved with Alberta NAWAMP for years, and are so passionate about wetlands and so passionate about municipalities. They are doing a tremendous amount of work at leading this group, really. At the last meeting we had of this group, we had everyone in the action group was there, which I was really excited about. So really, really engaged. And this group, they had already kind of engaged in the wetland education. They created, I'll just go back to this piece. In 2016, they put together this guide to making wetlands work in your municipality. It's a really well done document, and it needed updating. So they've spent part of their $5,000 on updating this document. So not creating something new, but making something more relevant to where they are now. So this group, they have some really engaged members that are really, really passionate and active, which has helped. And they also had already done some of this work before the Wetland Education Network came into existence. So there's several factors, I think, that has really made this group really engaged. So they decided to update their guide with their funding, as well as Ducks Unlimited has begun delivering a course to rural municipalities about wetlands. And so they also decided to spend some of their money to increase the capacity of that course to be delivered by Ducks Unlimited. And I think that's a totally legit way to use some of this funding, as opposed to creating something new. Why don't we support things that exist already and increase their capacity to get out there and deliver the message? In terms of topics that are really relevant to the municipal group that they want to talk about, similar to the agricultural community, it's the wetland policy and how to navigate that, especially for rural municipalities. And that's where Ducks Unlimited came in with this course. So there's some strong connections between the agricultural community and the municipal action group, because that policy piece is their main focus and thing they want to solve. And one thing with these groups, and I'll talk a little bit about it with the other two groups as well, is with the agricultural action group and the municipal action group, the problem that they needed solved was education around the wetland policy. That's what they saw the action group as able to do. That's why they kind of joined, and that's sort of the motivating factor. And so they had a problem that they wanted solved, and that's a really great use of these groups. And it makes a case for why they need to join. The other two groups are slightly different. Making that case of why people need to join an action group was much simpler with these two groups. The other two is a bit more challenging. So what's the problem that we're actually trying to solve with these action groups? It's an important thing to figure out. The third group is around education and public, which just the title itself is super challenging. So education, everything from K to 12, post-secondary, does it include professional learning for professionals, and then the public, so everyone. So this group, they don't really have an immediate problem to solve. People involved in these fields of education and public, they just love wetlands and want everyone to care and love and appreciate and conserve them. So they don't actually have necessarily a problem to solve together, but they want to figure out how to be more effective in education around wetlands. So this group, it was really interesting. Again, sometimes you get the right people in the room that just everything flows and it's great and we move forward. This group was a bit more challenging to, they didn't seem as engaged as the municipal group. And some of it has to do with the specific people in the group. It wasn't gelling. So our meetings were it was a challenge to facilitate. But what I learned as a coordinator is that I contacted most of the members offline after the meeting, and we had one-on-one conversations, and it really helped move things forward. So I was able to draw some really amazing ideas from them and then put them together in a way and present it back to the group. Say, I talked to you all individually. This is these common areas. So there was a bit more legwork on my part to kind of get this action group up and running and focused on something. It just has to do with who's in the group at the moment. So that was one of my learnings, is sometimes there's a lot of legwork to be done on the coordinator side to get those ideas out of the people, because maybe they just aren't group people and don't like to. It's sometimes challenging to work in a large group, especially when it's so diverse. So this group looked at several different ideas of what are we going to do together. We have people here. Inside Education does formal K to 12 education. Bow Habitat Station is more about public education. Battle River does all of it. So there's quite a variety of different groups here. And so they considered creating those broad wetland messages. And we thought, what a powerful thing for us all to have. If we were all saying the same thing about wetlands across the province, wouldn't that be amazing? And so we talked about that quite a bit. And we explored it with someone came in and did a presentation about creating those types of messages. And after that presentation, it was kind of decided that it was a huge task. When basically it came down to, if you want to create messages for everyone, if you want to speak to everyone, you're speaking to no one. That messages about wetlands would have to be very localized. So the challenges facing wetlands in southern Alberta, and even the types of wetlands, are different than if you were up north. So how do you create these huge wetland messages? And the big thing is to test them on the audience. And that was something that this group did not feel that was feasible. So we could create messages, but the big thing is to test them to see if they actually resonate with your audience. And that would have been a massive task. So that idea of creating province-wide wetland messages was going to be too big of a task for this group to take on at the moment. And whether it's an actual good use of anyone's time, we talked about that as well. So the project that this group wanted to focus on is engaging urban and semi-urban Albertans in their local wetland. So we identified, the first step was to identify an audience they wanted to work with. The K-12 education system, there's quite a few resources to support teachers and educators in that realm. So the priority audience for almost everyone was that urban, semi-urban dweller who has a wetland, either a constructed wetland or a natural wetland in their community that they can actually go to. And so the guide that they're creating is a guide to engaging your community in your local wetland. So it's targeted at maybe community associations who have a wetland in their community and want to bring their community together around it, either through stewardship activities or other types of activities. So that's the guide that's going to come out of this group. The next one, our final action group, is our industry action group, and you will see there is no one listed here. This was, when I was forming the groups, this was one of the more challenging groups to even find people to participate. And I think there's several reasons for that. One of them was me. I don't come from an industry background. I come from an education public background. So in terms of contacts and knowing who to connect with within the sector, the huge sector that we're calling industry, was a challenge for me personally. So I was relying on contacts from other people, and the biggest reach out in terms of emails and phone calls for me was to recruit people for the industry action group. I was able to recruit people for one meeting, and there was only 5 people. And we didn't really find much commonality. When you look at the agricultural and the municipal group, the policy was something that they could rally around and talk about and had a common experience around. The industry group, they said, well, the policy is that might be challenging for us, but we know how to navigate the system. We know who to talk to. They seemed to think they had that under control. They didn't need more education around the wetland policy or even wetlands in general. They're like, they kept saying we kind of know we know what we need to do. So there wasn't, I didn't make a good enough case for why we needed this action group. And so after the first meeting, the momentum was pretty low, and it was hard to identify a reason for them to be there. And I think with industry, it's really important to have a really clear reason and a clear benefit for them to be there. They're not just willing to show up and chat. And we weren't able to make that case for them. And as we move forward with the industry action group, we're looking more at considering how we might be able to support the professional organizations who are responsible for the wetland authenticating professionals. And so there might be an opportunity for us to support the professional associations with either a workshop or convening, or we don't know what that'll look like. So the $5,000 allocated to the industry action group is going towards interviewing the professional organizations to say, hey, we exist. How can we support you in your work around authenticating wetland professionals? So we'll see if that leads anywhere. And I think one thing with the network is that there was a solid structure created at the beginning, but you have to be okay with ebb and flow. Sometimes you hit it on the nail on the head, and this is great. This is hitting a need, and sometimes you don't, and you have to be okay with that. With the network, there'll be ebb and flow as things evolve. Maybe there'll be something that comes up with industry in the next year that'll be an action for people to come together around. I don't know. So if anyone has any ideas around engaging industry, I am all ears. And so I'll just finish up with our next steps for the Wetland Education Network. Like I said, it's still the first year. Networks take a while to evolve, to kind of get comfortable in their own skin, I guess, and see where they're going. So we're going to, by the end of March, we'll have 4 completed projects, and I think that will give us some direction for the next year. We're working on an online hub, wetlandsalberta.ca. It is a current website, but we are redesigning it. And so we want this to be a place where anyone interested in wetland education for any sector can come to find trusted resources. So we aren't going to post every single resource out there, but we're going to have a process to review resources to get posted on the website. So that hub will be a hub for the Wetland Education Network, but also for anyone who is looking for education around wetlands in Alberta. We have an annual workshop, and the workshop is coming up on March 14th. If anyone's interested in attending, it'll be in Nisku. I can send out the link. And next year, I think the first step for each of the action group is to really focus on the goals. So we created this great product this year. What are our goals? How do we want to move forward? What are our short, medium, and long-term goals? And I think that will help really define what the groups do. And it'll help people say like, oh, I want to be a part of that goal. I want to join your group. Or some people might say, oh, this isn't really fitting what I need right now. I might step out for a bit and come back in. So it'll really help define what the group is and really help us communicate more clearly around what these action groups think they can do together to move wetland education forward in Alberta. And that's my contact information. So if you have any questions or comments or want to talk about this further, give me a call or drop me an email and we can chat. Thank you. If you have any questions, I am all ears.
Okay, a couple of questions are coming in now.
Okay.
While we're waiting, thank you, Christina, for your presentation today. It was very interesting. Yeah, I'm sure that lost my train of thought. The first question is, great presentation, thanks. From the Education Action Group, why do you think there was less participation? Do you think the organizations themselves are in competition?
No, I think when I've spent the last 20 years in the field of environmental education and community education, and generally the people in those fields are very, this isn't a real word, sherry. They like to get together. When I was at a previous position, we did communities of practice for environmental educators, and there is lots, they are totally willing to come together and share. I've found that with that group. I think it's just who's there at the table right now. And these groups, I mean, there's enough schools to go around. There's enough need for wetland education at the school level that, no, I don't think competition was an issue. It's just, and it's also a huge topic. Like, how do you tackle education in public? I think the title to pull together people from that wide of a range and have that sort of mission of the group is part of that challenge of that group.
Okay, great. The next question is, thanks for a great webinar. An observation for you to react to. Perhaps the limited interest by the industry sector is related to their generally low impact on larger wetland conservation efforts, contrary to the agricultural sector. By larger, I mean, he meant broader.
Okay. So they have less of an impact?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it again, it's a sector that I I don't know much about it. I'm learning lots as I go. Yeah, it was interesting. Just the engagement in that sector was interesting. Yeah, you got to make the clear impact. And yeah, maybe it wasn't a huge deal for them. And I think also industry is a huge sector to consider, whether you're a utility or a road construction or forestry. The needs of those groups are quite diverse as well. There was some talk in the first industry meeting, as sort of the people I had at the table were more from the big companies like the TransAlta and the Husky. They saw a potential need for basic wetland education for the people on the ground. So basically the contractors that they work with to dig holes and to do that sort of work. They saw a potential need to build in some basic wetland education for those people. So they basically know enough to know when to stop and ask questions. Because if they do something wrong, it's going to cost the company money. So that might be a potential in the future for the industry group.
Sort of a best practices for them then.
Yeah. So they kept saying they just need to know enough to know when to stop digging.
Okay. Well, that appears to be it for the questions. Thank you everybody for attending, and thank you again, Christina, for your presentation today. We'll see everybody again next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you.